Good afternoon, everybody. Excellencies, fellow ambassadors, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, I'm delighted to welcome you to this afternoon's webinar on peace transitions, applying UN Security Council Resolution 2594 in Africa. For those of you who do not know me, my name is Nicola Brennan, and I am Ireland's permanent representative to the African Union, as well as Ireland's ambassador to Ethiopia, Djibouti, South Sudan, IGAD and UNECA. I have the pleasure of chairing today's webinar, which is being co-hosted by the Embassy of Ireland in Addis Ababa and Amani Africa Media and Research Services. Before we begin today's discussion, there are a few items of housekeeping that I would like to attend to. First of all, today's webinar is being recorded and will be available for playback on the websites of Amani Africa and Ireland's Department of Foreign Affairs. On the right-hand side of your screen, you should see a Slido platform. After our three speakers deliver their opening remarks, there will be a question and answer session. You can submit questions via this Slido platform, and I encourage you to do so. Just type your question into the box. Questions will be moderated to avoid duplication, and audience members can vote for those questions that they would particularly like to hear answered. If you are submitting a question, please also identify yourself and your organization. Today, I'm delighted to be joined by three esteemed speakers, and I'm delighted to introduce them. Firstly, we have Commissioner Bankole, who is the African Union's Commissioner for Political Affairs, Peace and Security. Secondly, we have Hannah Tete, who is the UN Special Representative of the Secretary General and Head of the United Nations Office to the African Union. And thirdly, we have Ambassador Jamal El-Sheikh, the Permanent Representative of Sudan to the African Union. Each of the three speakers will deliver opening remarks of about 10 minutes each, and that will be followed by question and answer. Following that, Dr. Solomon DeRosso, Founding Director of Amani Africa, will provide closing remarks for the end of today's webinar. And we intend that the webinar will last just before 5 p.m. for those on Addis Ababa time. The topic of today's webinar is peace transitions, applying UN Security Council Resolution 2594 in Africa. This important resolution was unanimously adopted by the UN Security Council on the 9th of September last, with the co-sponsorship of 22 African Union member states. It is the first ever standalone resolution on UN peacekeeping transitions. And it was adopted under Ireland's presidency of the Security Council, which concludes tomorrow, and was one of the major flagship themes for our month at the helm of the Council. When Ireland joined the Security Council at the start of this year, we did so with three overarching commitments: to build peace, to enhance conflict prevention, and to strengthen accountability. The adoption of Resolution 2594 delivers upon our commitment to build peace that is sustainable and resilient. To get a New York perspective on the resolution and Ireland's role in achieving it, we have a short video from our permanent representative to the United Nations in New York, Geraldine Byrne-Nason, which will play now.
Excellencies, friends, I'm delighted to join my colleagues at the Embassy of Ireland in Addis, along with our co-hosts, Amani Africa, for this timely discussion on applying UN Security Council Resolution 2594 on peacekeeping transitions in Africa. Peacekeeping, as many of you will know, is of profound importance to Ireland. It goes to the heart of who we are as a country and the role we play here at the United Nations. Today, there are over 500 Irish men and women serving as UN peacekeepers, including in the Democratic Republic of Congo and Mali. However, like all of you, our ultimate ambition is to live in a world where peacekeeping is not necessary. Ensuring a sustainable transition to peace building is key to this. With that overarching objective in mind, enhancing the link between peacekeeping and peace building is a priority for our membership of the Security Council. And it's why we were so proud that Resolution 2594 was co-sponsored by all members of the Security Council and by 97 members of the UN overall. The first standalone resolution on transitions delivers a roadmap and a framework for how the UN and its member states should manage those critical and sensitive junctures in a country's history where a peacekeeping mission is being drawn down. The question of how effectively the UN manages peacekeeping transitions is, I know, of huge importance and relevance to our African partners. Half of the current UN peacekeeping operations are based in Africa. African member states make a huge contribution to peacekeeping missions right around the world. And Africa is also where we have found some of our most challenging and successful examples of UN transitions. At the Security Council debate on UN transitions, which Ireland hosted as president this month, we were honoured to have briefings from President Ellen Johnson Sirleaf from Liberia, as well as Safa El-Ajib, a civil society activist from Sudan, on their experience of transitions. When the time does come for peacekeepers to leave, the wider UN system needs to be ready to step up and to step in. To do that, we believe that it's important that the Council has a shared vision of what that means. We know from these experiences that moving from peacekeeping to a peace-building presence is most successful when the process is inclusive, nationally owned, financially supported, and crucially, when there's a strong focus on the protection of civilians. While states bear primary responsibility for the protection of their own population, the Council also has a responsibility to encourage and support governments in developing and implementing national strategies to do just that. This requires the full participation of local communities and stakeholders, including women, youth, and civil society, as well as continued focus on human rights. A transition cannot be allowed to become a dash for the exit. Reconfiguring the UN's presence in the field must be viewed as a strategic process that enables and supports long-term peace-building efforts rather than just a reaction to events or dash to that exit. This means planning well in advance. It means ensuring coherence right across the UN system. None of this will be possible without the engagement of relevant regional and sub-regional organisations at all levels and all stages. The African Union, as well as organisations like ECOWAS and the International Conference of the Great Lakes, will have a crucial role to play when it comes to implementing Resolution 2594 on the ground. The role of the UN's Peacebuilding Commission on agenda items relating to Africa will also be of pivotal importance, particularly for effective transition planning. It's testimony to the importance of this issue that so many member states came together in New York to support Resolution 2594. However, our focus now needs to move to implementation. This will only be possible through partnerships in Africa at local, regional, and international levels. We owe it to all the peacekeepers we deploy that the hard-won peace gains they deliver are not lost as missions depart. That's why today's discussion is so important. I'm sure it will be a productive and insightful exchange, and I look forward to hearing about it from colleagues. Thank you very much.
Many thanks to Ambassador Byrne Nason in New York for that intervention, a very important one. And as we've just heard from her, Ireland's aim with this resolution is to strengthen the transition process from peacekeeping to peace building. One key element to a successful sustainable transition that really stuck out for me when reading the resolution is the need for inclusivity. And peace transitions need to be as inclusive as possible. They must involve the entire UN country team, including its agencies, funds and programs, especially the Peace Building Commission, as Ambassador Byrne-Nason highlighted, working in close partnership with the host state and local communities. In addition, the planning process needs to include the full, equal and meaningful participation of women, as well as the inclusion of youth, persons with disabilities and civil society. Our own experience of peacemaking on the island of Ireland bears testament to the importance of inclusivity. Among some of the most active participants in the formation of Northern Ireland's peace process was the Northern Ireland Women's Coalition. They had to fight for their place at the peacemaking table, but their participation had a disproportionately positive impact. One of the factors for this was that the coalition was a cross-community initiative based on existing community networks. And the Women's Coalition also brought a specific set of objectives to the peace talks in Northern Ireland. In particular, they advocated for inclusion in the peace agreement of a participatory model of democracy, integrated education, mixed housing, and youth, community and social development. They understood the need to break down community barriers and for peace dividends that would be felt across all communities. The evidence is clear that peace agreements, which include the active participation of women, last longer and are stronger. And this experience is also why the Women, Peace and Security agenda is placed at the centre of Ireland's foreign policy, including in our engagement with the African Union here in Addis Ababa. And of particular importance for today's discussion is the need to be inclusive of regional and sub-regional bodies such as the African Union and its regional economic communities. I'd like to read out operative paragraph 12 of Resolution 2594 at this point, as it essentially forms the basis for today's discussion, and it goes as follows. The Security Council recognises the contribution of regional and sub-regional organisations to peace building and transitions, and calls upon the Secretary-General to consult relevant regional and sub-regional organisations as appropriate in the planning and execution of transition processes, and to ensure that transition plans clearly articulate the potential roles of these organisations. And it's that key operative paragraph that brings us to today's discussion. In Africa, perhaps more than anywhere else, the contribution of regional and sub-regional organisations to peace transitions is clear. Just last month, the African Union Peace and Security Council discussed its support to member states in political transition and post-conflict situations. I am honoured, therefore, to be joined by Commissioner Bankole, who can tell us more about the role and contribution of the African Union to peace transitions. Commissioner Bankole, I hand the floor over to you for your introductory remarks. Thank you very much.
Good morning from on that side and afternoon from here in Addis Ababa. I would like to be very brief, but I really want to thank you for inviting us to this seminar. I have a personal passion for this discourse, and I will, as my remarks go, you will see the underlying issues. Over the past 7 decades, UN peacekeeping operations have undergone a series of fundamental transformations from their very original nature and purpose. What you can call the first generation peacekeeping has now evolved to robust, sometimes multifunctional, multidimensional operations, wherein the original principles of impartiality and the non-use of force became difficult to implement in the face of complex conflict environments. And this has rendered, frankly, sometimes the United Nations Second World War concept of peacekeeping as archaic, as obsolete, and sometimes ineffective, particularly in the context of the African peace and security landscape. It is important to look at the whole gamut of the regional and global response to the African security context. On our side, we're looking at a different peace support operation approach that embraces, in some cases, combat and peace enforcement techniques vis-a-vis peacekeeping. I've always asked this question to my colleagues: what peace is there to keep with Boko Haram or Al-Shabaab? What peace is there to keep with ISIS? So peacekeeping for us and the transitions mean a lot in different terms. And let me take this opportunity to briefly highlight three models that we've had: the AMISOM experience in Somalia, the lessons from the rehearted AU operations in Mali and Central African Republic, and then I will end with the critical factors for peace transitions. As you recall, AMISOM was authorized in 2007 by the African Union Assembly as a short-term solution to an immediate crisis of reducing the threat of Al-Shabaab. AU was expected to hand over to a UN peace operation after the fulfillment of the interim 6 months. 16 years down the line, 17 years, we are still waiting for the UN. It is very, very important to look at the long-term stabilization and the post-conflict reconstruction and development efforts in Somalia. Over the years, many CONOPs have been designed. Over the years, we've had all the various initiatives working with the UN in the logistical approach, but not in the combat phase. It is also necessary that we appreciate the role of the European Union in AMISOM and under the then umbrella of the African Peace Facility, which is now transforming into the European Peace Facility. From 2016, for instance, the Africa Peace Facility was rebalanced and revived to start looking at the question of the AMISOM exit strategy. It is important that we look at this from that perspective. Without going into details, let me also say the importance of transitioning of security responsibility from AMISOM to the Somali security forces. That is also on the card. We have continued to work with Somali authorities, for example, in the development and the design of the Somali transition plan. Let me move to another part of Africa where we have also experienced AU operations and rehearted by the UN. As you are aware, in Mali and in the Central African Republic, through the operational and institutional facing the challenges of transferring from AU to UN operations. Those challenges included the need to reconcile differences, training, equipment, human rights screening, resources within the timelines for transitions, and so on and so forth. But it is important that our two councils, the UN Security Council and the AU Peace and Security Council, then emphasize the centrality of the political process to long-term stabilization in these two countries. AU forces, of course, had limited mandates to deal with such short-term security threats, as this were to be followed by the UN peacekeeping operations. We're glad today that we have MINUSCA in Central African Republic and MINUSMA in Mali. And we are seeing a bit of progress regarding the issues. But the fundamental challenge of facing the threat of terrorism and violent extremism remain because of the limited nature of the mandate of MINUSMA, of MINUSCA. But today, we also know that MINUSCO in Eastern Congo and UNMISS in South Sudan are doing their best to better realign to the structural realities that remain critical. So AMISOM's presence remains very critical. As you know, I will not go into details with the post-2021 approach, and we're working with the UN, the EU, and Somali authorities as AU. We see light at the end of the tunnel, and we want to assure you that definitely with the UN Security Council Resolution 2568, we will continue to do our best to make sure that we defeat Al-Shabaab. This is for us not peacekeeping. It's sometimes, you have to face it, it's peace enforcement. And we need the international community represented by the UN Security Council and pro-African countries like Ireland to work on this. Let me end by saying, what are the critical factors that we must look out for when we engage on peacekeeping transitions? For us, who do we hand over to? What does the handover entail? What are the plans for the transition? What are the functions of the transition? And what does the transition actually lead to? And for us, I've tried to also answer those questions. And looking at UN Security Council Resolution 2594, which you had also highlighted, ownership and alignment, very, very critical to ensure that the country's cooperation remains a key ingredient to the success of the transition and to the success of the political transition, which was also mentioned earlier. On numerous occasions, our troop and police contributing countries have expressed deep frustration sometimes with the host country, sometimes with the UN, sometimes with ourselves, depending on how you look at it, because they have to do so many things. It is also important that we build coherence in our cooperation. As the international community, UN, the REX, the UN, the other players, we actually confuse the host countries where we're working, because sometimes we're trying to fly our flags. Sometimes we're doing the institutional toughing, and this is very, very critical. For example, the hybrid peacekeeping mission to Darfur, UNAMID, was very, very successful in some respects, but I can tell you that in the walls of Addis Ababa here in the AU, it is not popular within our Peace and Security Council. Why is that? Because the African Union as a whole felt being left behind, particularly in the transition. In UNITAMS, the African Union has had virtually little say, because the UN Security Council has taken it upon itself to drive the process. But at the institutional level in the UN, we are trying to do our best to work together. It is critical that we emphasize that. Just as point 3, just as the UN Security Council Resolution 2594 said, we must have clarity in the role of the operations, the mandate. I recall very well in MINUSCA, they said, oh, the mandate is protection of civilians. And what does that mean? The protection of civilians without any emphasis and energy being directed primarily to solving the political solution would be a total waste of time. Therefore, protection of civilians cannot be forever. And that is why they told us in South Sudan, when I was ambassador, and we went on field mission with the Peace and Security Council, that, hey, we do not want the UN because peacekeeping, because we don't want the force on our territory forever. And that sunk in my psyche, because what they are saying is that, oh, you have virtually been in Congo since independence, because we do not put enough of our political capital, the peace capital, what I can call the peace capital, into the most important factor, which is the political reconciliation and dialogue. I think we need to do that more for political transitions to work. The coherence, the strategy of engagement, our regional economic communities, our regional mechanisms. Africa is a special landscape when it comes to regional integration and regional interaction, particularly for peace. And that is why joint planning and implementation of peacekeeping transitions, very, very critical. The accord in Mali, the accord in Central African Republic must definitely be top of the agenda for any peacekeeping or peace transitional processes. The impact of the legacy and operations must also be taken fully on board. As I stated, we must avoid undue longevity of peacekeeping operations. It is not good for the sovereignty, for the capacity of the state, because they become ever reliant. I must tell you, for example, that we met an IDP, internally displaced person, in Darfur in 2019, who told us, hey, you guys, UAU, UN, you come every year, you write your report, and our position remains. Our status remains. We have not seen any improvement in getting back there to their original community. These are facts that we must put into context. Let me end, because it is imperative for us that the political will, first, of the host country, the political will of the United Nations, the political will of the AU must all come together to ensure that peacemaking, peace building are interwoven. And that is why in our African Union Commission's Department, Political Affairs and Peace and Security, which is new, we've started thinking of developing a conceptual framework on these three factors: peacemaking, peace building, and peace enforcement. I can assure you that we cannot continue to use the same formula from post-Second World War age in today's world. I wish you the best this discussion, and I'm ready to answer some questions. And I think, as the last speaker said, I want to assure you that we are now putting a lot of emphasis on one thing: how can the AU support its member states in political transitions and post-conflict reconstruction and development? It must all be the whole gamut. It must be mainstreamed into peacekeeping, if we still use that term. For us in the AU, we're talking of peace support operations because they are multidimensional, they are multifunctional, and of course, they can contribute to the success of having stability in our countries. I thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Commissioner Bankole. And not only your passion for this discourse has come across in your opening remarks, but also your very deep concern and your very deep analysis of the various complex contexts in which peace support operations, as you've highlighted, are operational, and the lessons that we're learning that we need to apply. I particularly liked your reference to the peace capital, looking at political reconciliation and dialogue as central to peacekeeping transitions. And indeed, the emphasis you put on the strong engagement required with the two councils, the UN Security Council and your own AU Peace and Security Council. And really today, one of the objectives of the webinar is to explore how the decisions of the Security Council, which are taken in New York, can be translated into action on the African continent. And I'd like to now invite our second speaker, Hannah Tete, the SRSG and head of the United Nations Office to the African Union, to speak about the application of Resolution 2594 in Africa. Hannah, I'll hand the floor over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good. Thank you very much. Your Excellency, Ambassador Nicola Brennan, Permanent Representative of Ireland to the African Union. Your Excellency, the Commissioner for Political Affairs, Peace and Security, Commissioner Bankole. Your Excellency, the Permanent Representative of Sudan to the African Union, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of the UN, I'd like to commend Ireland for organizing this seminar to mark the adoption of Security Council Resolution 2594 at the conclusion of Ireland's presidency of the Security Council for the month of September. The adoption of Security Council Resolution 2594 comes at a time when there is concerted effort by the United Nations Secretary General to mobilize partners and stakeholders in support of more effective United Nations peacekeeping operations through the Action for Peacekeeping Initiative and Action for Peacekeeping Plus. This initiative highlights the importance of advancing political solutions, strengthening the protection of civilians, improving the safety and security of peacekeepers, implementing the Women, Peace and Security Agenda, supporting effective performance and accountability, and improving peacekeeping partnerships, strengthening the conduct of peacekeeping operations and personnel, and strengthening the impact of peacekeeping on peace building and sustaining peace. And I know that's a lot. But essentially, I'm underlining the points that were just made by Commissioner Bankole about looking at the issue of peacekeeping, peace building, and transitions from a holistic point of view, and taking into consideration the need to work closely with our partners. And on the African continent, one of our key partners is the African Union, together with the regional economic communities and regional mechanisms. The Resolution 2594 underscores the need for early planning and a strategic approach into any transition planning from peacekeeping to peace building, as well as integration into the wider country-specific transition efforts. We would like to encourage national ownership and involvement of key stakeholders in this process, including the participation of women, young people, marginalized groups, persons with disability, and civil society. And of course, we need to consult with relevant regional and sub-regional organizations, as well as other stakeholder organizations in the planning and execution of transition processes to ensure that the transition plans clearly articulate the potential role of these organizations in supporting the transition and the host country thereafter. There's no doubt that there have been several UN peacekeeping transitions in Africa, and all of them have come with different experiences for the United Nations. From Liberia to Sierra Leone, Ethiopia and Eritrea, though that was quite some time ago, so people might have forgotten that one, Sudan, Chad, among others. In all these transitions, it is evident that there is no universally acceptable one model in deciding to launch, close, or significantly alter a United Nations peacekeeping operation in a particular country setting, especially given the unique circumstances of each conflict, of each country, and the varying degrees of international support each peace operation evokes. This is central to our discussion today and equally important in various discussions in the United Nations Security Council and more broadly other organs and agencies of the United Nations systems as a whole on the issue of transition. Peacekeeping transitions or exits may be initiated by three circumstances: successful completion of the mandate, failure, or partial success. In all of these circumstances, there are different issues to be considered regarding the closure of a mission, or in some instances, passing responsibility to another United Nations regional body or host nation operation. While acknowledging that discussions on United Nations transitions are not new, they have recently, of course, gathered more attention because of the developments and as several UN missions are currently undergoing or planning for transitions. The UN has recorded successes in the past decades, but has also faced many difficult and complicated conflicts. Therefore, it's important to acknowledge that there have been cases where efforts fell short of our objectives. For instance, there has been more than once during the last 10 years when the United Nations has withdrawn a peacekeeping operation or dramatically altered its mandate, only to realize that the situation remains unstable or there may be a resumption of renewed violence. Therefore, the transition needs to be planned well in advance in order to, as much as possible, work towards a transition that addresses the concerns of all stakeholders. We are of the view that the best way to address the challenges of a peacekeeping transition is through integrated and early planning, on the basis that only integrated transition management will be sustainable in the long run. We need to develop realistic benchmarks at the outset of a mission's life, as well as their review and adjustment through continued dialogue between the host country, the Security Council, the United Nations Secretariats, and of course, the secretariats of regional and sub-regional organizations that are also involved in these conversations. While peacekeeping missions can contribute initially to building functioning and legitimate institutions, we must recognize that these institutions would probably be quite young and quite fragile. And therefore, partnerships with other key stakeholders, such as the World Bank, on the African continent, the African Development Bank, other UN agencies, funds and programs, regional and sub-regional organizations, and bilateral partners. Leveraging each actor's comparative advantage should be critical in the planning and implementation of the transitions that provide long-term support to the host country authorities, recognizing that these stakeholders will continue to have important relationships with the host country going forward. But in order for this to be possible, we need to have continuous engagement, both at the technical working level and also at the principal level, so that this can be an ongoing conversation and can be flexible and adapt to the new realities on the ground in order, as the resolution provides, to provide the Security Council with realistic, updated, important, credible, relevant information on which they can base their decisions as the UN Security Council. UN peacekeeping transitions are inevitable as the UN presence adjusts to larger national transition processes in host countries. After all other UN agencies, funds, and programs which have worked in the peace-building process are likely to continue working in the transition. And that's the reason why the involvement of other stakeholders and the involvement of key national stakeholders is critical so that the work that they can do thereafter can be relevant to national aspirations. The early involvement and ownership by host governments is central to the transition process because of the role they play in determining when the time is ripe for peacekeepers to leave, noting that no country wishes to keep peacekeepers on their soil longer than necessary. But it is important that the determination as to when peacekeepers are going to leave is not just driven by national political considerations. There has to be an appreciation of the fact that the peace and stability of the host country has implications for the peace and stability of the region as a whole. And that is the reason why there is, if you like, a broader interest in the process of transition, supporting the host country in order to make sure that it is successful, not just for the host country, but for all other nations that will be implicated one way or the other by the outcome of this transition and movement to peace-building process. The need for continuity of political support and financial resources to a host nation after a transition is something I cannot emphasize enough. With the closure of peacekeeping missions comes the withdrawal of financial and logistical support through assessed contributions. In most instances, follow-on missions, like those led on by the UN's Department of Political and Peacebuilding Affairs or other UN agencies, funds, and programs, are often expected to continue implementing peace-building priorities without necessarily having the same predictable budgetary support. Therefore, it's important to put strategies in place to help to address the funding gaps, review civilian capacities in the aftermath of conflict, and strengthen interoperability and flexibility across the UN system through better use of UN resources, including assessed contributions, to support the peace-building priorities and harmonize service delivery across agencies. Sustained political and financial support for ongoing peace-building efforts in host countries throughout and beyond the transition phases are very important. And while at some point in time there may be elements of donor fatigue, it's important for us to realize that if everything goes badly wrong, the cost to all of us will be much more than the support that we could have given to make sure that the transition was successful. Finally, UN peacekeeping transition should be seen within the larger context of supporting the existing UN presence to adapt to the larger transition process of the host country. Devoid of being seen as an event, it should be managed as a gradual reconfiguration process, during which a typical peacekeeping operation hands over responsibilities to perhaps another UN entity, certainly not working alone, working in partnership, as our partnerships in these processes, I believe, are going to become more and more important to ensuring successful transitions on the African continent. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Hannah. Incredibly in-depth and substantive comments from you. And I think particularly taking a holistic perspective from the outset on peacekeeping, peace building and transitions. And I think what came across incredibly strong is that real emphasis on early involvement, national ownership, integrated and early planning, no one size fits all, the need for flexibility, adaptability. I think then moving into that broader range of partnerships, that real emphasis on financial support, as well as focusing on social and economic development in these contexts and supporting countries to come through. So thank you very much for that. I just want to encourage participants to use the Slido platform as outlined earlier for question and answer. We have one final speaker, but I'm not sure if he is actually online. I don't see him online. So what we'll do is we'll just move ahead, and if Ambassador Jamal El-Sheikh manages to get back into the system, we will allow him to speak at a later point. But let's just move along in terms of the question and answers. And I'm looking now to my colleague to see if we have any questions on the Slido platform ready. I have a few questions, so maybe I'll pose those to kick off. And I have one question for Commissioner Bankole, and then one question for both Commissioner Bankole and the Special Representative of the Secretary General, Hannah Tete. So just, Commissioner, I'd be very interested to hear a little bit more about the African Union's work in operationalizing the post-conflict Reconstruction and Development Centre in Cairo, a process which Ireland is pleased to be supporting, and one is which you mentioned is central to peace transitions. So from your perspective, what role does the African Union's PCRD policy and the new centre have to play in peace transitions? So maybe you can talk us through a little bit on that. And then secondly, and as highlighted by Hannah, the issue of financing for peace building, and indeed yourself, is an important element in this discussion. Both of you highlighted that. And again, I'd be very interested to hear from both of you your thoughts on innovative approaches to peace building financing, both from the AU and from the UN perspective, including, for example, is there a role for the private sector in the spirit of an inclusive process and supporting peacekeeping transitions? So I'll hand over maybe to Commissioner Bankole first, and then Hannah to respond to those two questions, while I look on the Slido platform for others. So over to you, Commissioner Bankole, in the first instance. Thank you.
No, thank you so much, Ambassador. And I really want to, again, appreciate this opportunity. I can assure you that we've started the process of full operationalization of the PCRD Center in Cairo. We are trying to overcome some of the operational issues in terms of location, office space, and all the like, including staffing. But as you said, the main factor regarding post-conflict and reconstruction on our continent is that we have been waiting for the multilateral financial institutions to take over in post-conflict situations, and it's been very, very slow. Therefore, apart from being the advocacy formula for, that's the center, to the hub, the advocacy hub, to enlighten the international community, help mobilize with partners and resources, human, technical, and where necessary financial, to help countries in transition while they are actively in transition. Because there's a difference between 10 years after, it's always going to be a problem. So we're looking at a whole combination of working in the DDR space, in the security sector reform space, and promoting the most important factor, which is usually the political transition associated with post-conflict. And that is why in August, the Peace and Security Council examined for the first time in its history a theme on AU support, African Union support, to its member states. and please underline that, African Union support to its member states experiencing political transitions and post-conflict situations. And what we did was to mobilize AUDA NEPAD, the African Union Development Agency, NEPAD, as well as the African Development Bank, to start looking at active collaboration with countries emerging from conflict. This is very critical, and we believe that once the center fully operationalizes, there will be more activities in that respect. First, the research part, but most importantly, the awareness and the mobilization for support from even member states. The African Union has what is called the ASI, the African Solidarity Initiative, but it has been docile and dormant in the last 5-6 years, and we're going to consider the opportunities to revive it. Because I believe, like we have, for example, Rwanda is supporting Mozambique to fight terrorism in Cabo Delgado. That is in the spirit of African solidarity. Lastly, let me end by emphasizing that in November, we have instituted what we call a post-conflict reconstruction and development awareness week. The idea, as I said, is to mobilize in-house and externally support for countries. In this process, we believe that in November, where number one, Egypt will be the chair of the Peace and Security Council. Egypt is also the host of the PCRD Center. It comes to gel where we want to use the opportunity to also launch the center in Cairo and create more awareness in terms of media activities, outreach to the international community, to our member states, to support countries in post-conflict. And we have identified 7 countries. I hope I can remember them offhand. The 2 Sudans, Mali, Central African Republic, Chad, Libya, and one is missing, to make them 7. Somalia, 7 countries we believe are not only in post-conflict, we're seeing them as post-conflict. Some of them are still actively in conflict, but we believe, and Gambia, we believe that this is the time to support them, from constitutionalism to a democratic and stable society. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Commissioner, for that, and really good to hear the plans on post-conflict reconstruction and development, and the Awareness Week in November, hugely critical, as you said, both internally and externally, and to look at that comprehensive package of support to countries in transition, bringing all of the organs of the African Union to bear. Hugely supportive of that, and we look forward to engaging with you further on that coming up to November. Can I just call in Hannah to respond to my questions, and then our final speaker is online, so I'll invite him following Hannah's intervention. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. So I think it's important to recognize that indeed, given the fact that there is some element of donor fatigue on the part of the main financial contributors to a lot of our multilateral organizations, there is indeed the scope for looking for private sector support. But it's important to recall that countries that are in the process of transition have fragile developing institutions. And so therefore, while we talk about possible support from the private sector, it's also important for us to think ahead of that on a framework for engaging with the private sector in order to make sure that these institutions in their fledgling state are not compromised. Because when you look at the economies, let me take again on the African continent, if you look at the economies of most of our countries, you realize that there is a very small formal sector, a very large informal sector, and the informal sector is made up of micro, small, and medium enterprises. So when you're talking about private sector participation, to what extent are you expecting these businesses to be able to provide the funding, the supporting financing, to implement in any strategic manner the kind of support that we need to strengthen exactly these institutions, to create greater opportunity for the private sector and to create markets. On the other hand, you have very large multilateral, multinational organizations in different sectors of the economy that may have strategic interests in these countries and therefore have also a stake in their stability. But it's important that if they are called upon to support transition processes, that it does not create a situation where they de facto begin to dictate policy and strategy within the development, the strengthening of their governance institutions and the development of the country. So I think, yes, there is a role to play, but we must also think through how we are going to, for lack of a better word, construct a frame that allows private sector participation without having compromises that at the end of the day will then further damage the peace-building transition that we're trying to create. Thank you.
Apologies there. I think Nicola just moved device. Nicola, I think you're still on mute. Nicola, can you hear us okay? Nicola, are you able to hear us okay?
Yes, I am.
Okay, yeah, we can hear you fine now.
Hannah, thank you so much for that comprehensive response on financing and engaging the private sector support and ensuring that institutions, fragile institutions in countries emerging from conflict are not compromised. Hugely important points there. Colleagues, I'd like to now call in our third speaker, who I see is online, Ambassador Jamal El-Sheikh, Permanent Representative of Sudan to the African Union. Yes, I can. Can you hear me? Sorry.
Yes, I can.
Okay, great.
Yes,
thank you. Listen, as we know, Sudan is a country that's currently experiencing a peace transition from UNIMID to UNITAMS, and we're really looking forward to hearing firsthand some of the lessons from an African peace transition in action.
Thank you.
Yes, Ambassador Jamal, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. First, I apologize, just I got disconnected for technical reasons. Do you hear me? Hello? Hello?
Yeah, we can hear you fine.
Hello? Hello?
We can hear you fine, but you have two connections open.
Yes, disconnect that one. Hello?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay, thank you very much. I apologize, I got disconnected for technical reasons, and I thank Nicola and greet all of you. I missed many of what have been said. Anyway, I will talk on just transition in Sudan, and let me start by just we need to identify some challenges prior to this transition. First, in Sudan, we got our independence in 1956. That's almost 65 years. We have 17 years of democratic system. Other than that, then we have like a sort of a mixture or just 3 or 4 coups. So this is affected the transition we are talking right now. And this also led to the absence of political activities, parties, and all these things. Also, secondly, the way this change took place also is affecting what's going on in Sudan right now. Because when we have this popular uprising, by the people, the youth, everybody in Sudan. And then the military and security apparatuses joined this, and all of them, they made this change. So then this resulted in a debate on who made this change. This is the civilians or the military or both of them. And this is also contributed to what's going on today in Sudan, because there is this debate of just that. Afterwards, then we have this tension, and we have this mediation of the African Union and Ethiopia between the military and the civilians. The civilians who led this were called Forces for Freedom and Change. And then it comprises of many parties, many movements, and many political components. Versus the military component, then we have this dialogue, which lasted for some time, for I think 4 months or something, led by the African Union and Ethiopia. And I think it was a very tough one, this negotiations and mediation. Personally, I feel this led to that those people, when they were negotiating, they led a point of a very high and much fatigue. So they almost want to sign a document. This is why I think the constitutional document, which like our constitution right now, which governs this transition, was not a perfect one because of all these tensions, lack of trust, and also just like some exclusion concept was applied by both sides at that time. And then also I think one of the challenges we met later was the status of the military and security apparatuses, because we have the national army, we have the NIST, national security, and then we have this rapid support forces, and which is not a very just structured army forces. This also led to some conflict or differences within the army, and then also we had experienced the splits of the freedom and forces of change, which is a political incubator, and then now things change. The FFC is now like just split, but the army is almost united, and the military apparatus and the security. And then because of this, all this absence of this democracy, absence of political democratic practice activities, this also led to this polarization, which we had been experiencing for the last 2 years. And now I think one of the reasons also we are experiencing what's going on now in Sudan is we are getting nearer to the election time as well. So the political forces or the political parties or entities or components, each are trying to maximize its gains or to prepare itself for getting the maximum during the elections. I think also one of the main challenges contributed to some difficulties we are facing is the non-implementation of the whole articles of the constitutional document. For instance, it states that the constitutional document, a formation of a transitional assembly, it has not been formed until now. It states it calls for a formation of elections laws. Those has not been drafted yet. Some constitutional dialogue, it has not been also drafted yet, and many others, some other commissions like Judiciary Commission, it has not been formed yet. And those, I think everybody understand this. Those are very essential for preparing for a good election. Okay, and now we have almost 2 years from when signing this constitutional document, and all those laws and commissions are not ready. So the split also within the political component led to attacking each other, and now maybe in the coming 2-3 days we will have two components, two parties of FFC, the split ones and the one who are ruling now. I think one of the also, maybe I cannot say, maybe not the shortcoming, but the challenges, the constitutional document states that there should a government form should be of a bureaucratic nature, not political. And this is the first government we had was from bureaucrats, and then we changed this, and now we have a party government based on parties. And this is, I think, some people are considering it as violation of the constitutional document, and this has also led to this tension. Now the army right now is calling for going back to the initial document and have a one unified FFC, and then to negotiate, to go on and to implement the constitutional document. But I don't think this easy. One also of the shortcomings, I think, of the constitutional document which have not been implemented is the weak change of the weak participation of women, civil society, youth. This is, I think, one of the main components. One, I think, also of the challenges when we signed this the constitutional document, the armed struggle groups were not part of it. Then they joined partially, and we have some still out, like Abdelaziz Al-Hilo. So those newcomers also, they have now, we have a split with those new three-comers. One of them joined the now government, and two of them are out of it and part of the split FFC. So also all those, I think also one of the challenges we are facing is the region is not very much stable. We have tension within our relations with Ethiopia, as you know, whether on the borders, whether on the gate, and also Ethiopia is experiencing a very difficult transition, and it has its own challenges. Also, it affects Sudan and it affects our transition. I also feel one of the gaps we have is the absence of the realistic benchmarks. And here I quote what Hannah has said. We didn't have a benchmarks to evaluate and to assess how things are going. Also, now I think to move forward with this transition, we need first to keep the constitutional document intact and to refer to it. It's the only document that nobody is challenging. Other than this, we are going to open just a Pandora box. We have to refer to it and just implement what's there in it. And also, secondly, we need the FFC, they need to unite. Because now otherwise we will have these challenges: who will join, who will not join, who is the genuine one, who is the real FFC. Everybody is claiming he is or they are the FFC. And also we need to keep this partnership. Any exclusion, call or base will be damaging to Sudan and will be very harmful. And we should all have this political will to maintain this partnership and also to maintain implementing this constitutional. As for maybe the region and the international community, I think one of the lessons learned, I was following up UNAMID many times. I was almost looking for UNAMID file for a long time. Commissioner Bankole touched on it. We need to study the context. The African Union, IGAD, the UN, we need to do more research on this. Just coming with the peacekeeping resolution under Chapter 7 from the UN or from the Peace and Security Council, just to be implemented on the ground, the context may be absolutely different. This is why the peacekeepers are facing those challenges. And I think also the regional and international community should put pressure for all those components in Sudan to maintain and keep this partnership intact and to move to the democratic elections. Also, we are faced with the security arrangements implementation for those newcomers, the armed groups. Also, the international community needs to contribute financially and technically to implementing it. The security and military sectors reform is very important. Also here we need the international community and the region, the African Union, to help on this. And I think if we could maintain this or just implement, I'm trying just to touch on some issues. I think Sudan could represent a good model for safe and smooth transition. And I will end by just, I don't expect any setback in this transition in Sudan. No way for a coup to survive for 1 hour in Sudan. I thank you.
Ambassador Jamal, thank you for that excellent intervention on the real challenges that Sudan is facing in its transition. And just on your last point, we all support you there in terms of ensuring a very successful transition. I think, you know, some of the real challenges you highlighted there was really the importance of inclusivity. Again, you highlighted that women, civil society, and indeed that armed groups, and the importance of being inclusive and they being included in the transition, and indeed in informing, you know, what comes next. I think your other real point, talking about the region not being stable and the challenges that poses, and the real need for neighbouring countries and regional organisations to continue to support, that resonates quite a lot. And it was one of the questions I was going to ask you about how best to sustain regional engagement in peace transitions beyond the peacekeeping phase. And in some ways, you talked a little bit about that around the international community and regional organisations. Understanding the context is all important, pressure to keep the partnership intact going forward, and indeed support for security sector reform and other really critical processes. And if you would like to reflect further on that, in a minute, I'll hand over in terms of questions and answers. If you'd like to reflect a little bit further on that, I'd be happy to invite you to do so. We have over 100 participants on this webinar, so that's really, really excellent. And I have 2 questions that have been posed by them. And the first one I'll set out there is from Nuruddin Aziz from the UN Office to the AU. So Hannah, from your office. And the question posed is, how do we ensure that we factor in the aspects of transitions, the exit strategy, in defining the end state during the planning process? And we often miss this. And in a way, Hannah, that speaks to the point that you made about really important holistic perspective at the outset and for integrated planning. So perhaps you could take that question, even though it is from within your own office. So if you could take that question, I'd appreciate it. The second question I have, and perhaps Commissioner Bankole, if he's still online, could take this one, is taking a holistic approach. What needs to happen for a realistic and successful reconfiguration of AMISOM to be possible, as the Somali troops are not yet ready? So if Commissioner Bankole is online, I'd appreciate it if he would take that. So maybe I'll hand over to Hannah first, and then to Commissioner Bankole, and then finally to Ambassador Jamal. So over to you, Hannah, first of all.
Well, thank you very much. I think that the challenge with the point Aziz has made is that usually when we deploy a peacekeeping mission or a peace enforcement mission on the part of the AU, it's in a crisis situation. We're in a hurry. We're responding to the situation as is. And then during the period of stabilization, we probably haven't previously given as much attention to what would be the exit strategy as we should have. And I think that's an important marker for us to begin to think about in transitions going forward, that we should not be thinking about the exit strategy in the year that we decide, okay, we're looking to draw down this as soon as possible. Once the stabilization of the situation has commenced, in as much as we're going through the process of political dialogue as well as having the supporting peacekeeping operation, we begin to think through with the stakeholders, what does a successful exit look like? And the planning and the programming and all the activities that we undertake with the host country should therefore be moving towards how do we get to that exit strategy. Now, none of this is set in stone, because depending on developments and situations as they evolve, there will have to be some adjustments to that. But I think that the answer to that is, while it may not be something that we consider from the start, it certainly should be something we should be considering at least within a year of starting this operation. What does stabilization look like? What are our best efforts moving towards? What conditions do we need to see before we can think about the transition? And then when we get to the transition, we continue to look at who would be the key stakeholders to engage in that process, planning process, in order to make it more successful.
Hannah, thank you very much for that response. And it really does speak to your point earlier as well, as the importance of flexibility, adaptability, but also having key benchmarks as we go through the process. Is Commissioner Bankole online, and could he come in now and respond to the question on the reconfiguration of Amazon? Okay, I think the Commissioner may have stepped out. So Jamal, let me hand back to you to see if you'd like to add anything to what you said about how to keep that regional engagement and support going through the transition. Thank you.
Thank you, Nicola. Actually, I think the experience we had with the African Union and Ethiopia in just mediating during that difficult time we had in 2019, it's 2018, 2019. This was, I think, it's a good experience, but also I think it's about the domestic internal situations of those countries of the region. If you are facing challenges inside domestically, then I think it's difficult for a country to look beyond. And as I said, if you look now at the region, Sudan is facing some challenges, South Sudan is facing some challenges, as well as Ethiopia, as well as Somalia, as well as the region. So I think we need to agree and research and do some researches on how to reach this. I can call this national interest versus regional interest. If we could reach a common ground on this regional interest, whatever the situation nationally was going on, I think this will be good. There are some attempts at trying to reach some treaties and some, but it didn't go through because of the challenges, I think, and maybe of that. Each of us, we are looking inwards, not outwards. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Jamal. I really appreciate those additions. There's one more question. We're nearly coming to the end, but there is one more question that's come in, and I'd like to pose that to Hannah, because I think she can speak to it extremely well. And that question is, what initiatives are in place within the UN and the AU to increase women's participation in peacemaking and transitions? An issue that a number of us have raised on the session today. So over to you, Hannah, and then we'll come to our last speaker. Thanks a million.
Thank you very much. Well, I believe that most of the guests on the line would be very much aware of the AU's effort in building mediation capacity with FemWise. And that is an initiative that we have supported, because we believe that it is important to have more women involved in peace-building processes. But the way to have them involved is not just to train them, but to also deploy them in order that they can get the real life experience where they haven't been involved in that before, but also to pair them with women who actually have done this before, in order that they can also have the benefit of learning from experience. And when it comes to the process of track 2, track 1, track 2, track 3 mediation, I mean, you can have as much training as you can possibly be given, but learning is essentially also by doing. And so to the extent that we are able to have more women deployed in these processes and supporting the transition processes, and of course, having more women involved in the governments, the transitional governments of the host countries, beyond the position of Minister for Gender and Children, and actually getting them involved in more substantive subject matter ministries, departments, and agencies, so that they can also apply a gender lens to these processes, I think would be very helpful in this regard. From the perspective of the UN Political and Peacebuilding Affairs Department, our focus is on the mediation and the peacebuilding efforts. From the perspective of our colleagues in UNDP, who do much more work on the governance side, it's on promoting inclusivity in stakeholder consultations, but also in the establishment of the government and the way in which it works with key stakeholder groups. I'd be the first to say that there's much more that can be done. And I think that it's important for us to recognize that this is not an event, it's a work in progress. And we need the goodwill of our male counterparts to also make this happen. So I'm glad that we have a he for she like Commissioner Bankole, who definitely is committed to this. And the more Commissioner Bankoles we can get in terms of attitude, the better we'll be able to deliver on this particular agenda.
Anna, thank you so much. I knew you would give a substantive answer to that, and I think really for your leadership on this particular issue as well, within your own office, within the AU, and indeed at UN level. Really excellent there. Now listen, colleagues, unfortunately we are coming to an end for today's webinar, and we have Dr. Solomon Deroso, who's the director of Amani Africa, and I'm going to hand over to him. He has the unenviable task of trying to capture the main points of today's discussion, which was extremely rich across our three panelists, and which huge gratitude to each one of them for bringing their expertise, their lived experience to bear into this webinar today. And I think most of you are aware Amani Africa is a leading think tank covering the work of the African Union Peace and Security Council, and the strengthened link between the UNSC, the UN Security Council in New York, and the AUPSC here in Addis is so important to sustainable peace and security, and that's been raised by many of the panelists today, and I know it's also an issue that Solomon will speak about. So Solomon, over to you, and then I'll come back in at the end just to close. Thank you, Solomon.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Nicola, and also Excellencies, Ambassadors, Commissioner Bankole, SRSG, Hannah Tete, and all distinguished participants. What is expected of me, I was going to say, was that to thank everybody, because all have shared very rich insights, and there is nothing really to add to that. But Nicola, you have pinned me down in order to also say a few things about what came out of the deliberations. Also, I wish to thank the Embassy of Ireland for convening this event and for collaborating with us in sharing this platform with all the distinguished speakers and also participants. It is indeed an absolute pleasure for us at Amani Africa, as you rightly pointed out, to enhance this close collaboration and partnership between the Peace and Security Council and the UN Security Council as a critical pillar of effective response to the peace and security challenge on our continent. In terms of the deliberations this afternoon, Resolution 2594, both in terms of the process that went into the adoption of the resolution, but also the richness of the content, is reflective of the importance that the UN and member states of the UN attach. You can see this, for example, from the fact that 97 member states of the UN, including all the 15 members of the Security Council, were co-sponsors of this resolution. I think it's only natural that they attach this critical importance to transitions after having seen from the various experiences of peacekeeping operations and the transitions of those peacekeeping operations, including, as highlighted in the interventions from Commissioner Bankole, as well as SRSG Hannah Tete and Ambassador Jamal. From the experiences on the ground, there have been many instances in which transitions have faced challenge. And transitions, as we have heard from all of them, is a very sensitive and critical stage, which needs to be handled with a great deal of care and also adequate preparations and planning, so that the investment that went into the peacekeeping process and the time and energy and sometimes the lives and limbs that have been lost as a result of the peacekeeping process wouldn't be reversed, so that the peace that has been kept would be sustainable through a peace building process. And the experiences that have been shared on the African continent and the current ongoing processes, such as, for example, the transition, the post-2021 presence and form that AMISOM would take, is a clear indication of the importance of this point about the attention that needs to be given to peacekeeping transitions, from peacekeeping to peace building. And in this respect, the critical considerations that need to be borne in mind as far as transitions goes have been highlighted by all the speakers. One, planning, extremely critical. As the interventions from SRSG Hannah indicated, we need to think of exit and transitions of peacekeeping from the very outset of planning our interventions and peacekeeping itself, so that we wouldn't be doing this as a last-minute process and engagement. This would be critical also to commit all the various stakeholders to an agreed upon parameters in terms of the timing and also the benchmarks for transitions. Other considerations that have been outlined include the importance of inclusivity. In your opening remark, Nicola, and also the intervention from the ambassador in New York, the importance of inclusivity have been highlighted. Inclusivity of all the stakeholders at the national level, including the various social and political forces, youth, women, and in his intervention, Ambassador Jamal pointed out the importance of taking into account various political as well as security elements in the country, including opposition armed groups, for example, as the experience in Sudan highlights. Beyond and above inclusivity and consultations, the importance of the role of regional and sub-regional organizations and actors have also been highlighted, and indeed paragraph 12, operational paragraph 12, have been specifically cited as to the role of this. And the importance of the role of regional actors and institutions have been underlined in the intervention of Ambassador Jamal when he said regional dimensions, including, for example, the role that the AU played with respect to the mediation process in Sudan is indicative of the importance of these actors in transition processes. The other critical element that have come across all the three speakers, for example, is national ownership. The role of national ownership has come out clearly across all the three speakers. And of course, in this respect, while it has been underlined that national actors need to assume greater responsibilities and indeed need to be at the center of the process of transitions, the process of transition shouldn't be subject to the political calculations of a particular moment in the life of a government. That the interest of the broader country needs to dictate how transitions do happen. The question of flexibility have also been highlighted. I thought it also came out very powerfully from the intervention of Ambassador Jamal that we have to take into account, for example, the historical context of the country, where the peacekeeping operation and the transition from peacekeeping to a peace-building context is happening. The political context matters a great deal. Despite whatever investment that went into Darfur through the peacekeeping process, the events that unfolded in Sudan in the course of 2019 and 2020 obviously have had very serious bearing on the transitional process. The transitional process was conceived prior to the emergence of these very serious political developments in Sudan. But how these new developments would impact and have impacted the transition process is an issue that requires, I think, further reflections. Also, I think the continuing issues affecting the national process, the primacy of politics have been underscored. The primacy of politics entails, as explained by Ambassador Bankole as well as SRG Hannah, requires that there is a national political settlement and agreed roadmap to which all political forces have committed themselves in an inclusive and participatory process. Finally, last but not least, the role of financial support have also been highlighted. Whether that financial support comes from the international community, as we know it traditionally, or from private sector actors, as have been discussed in your question, Nicola, and also in the intervention of SRSG Hannah, that the cost of withdrawing support could be much higher than a sustained support for a country in transition, because if after all of the investment the transition fails, then the cost would be much higher. Those were the points that I have been able to pick up from the discussions and the deliberations and very rich and insightful presentations. So I thank you very much once again.
Solomon, thank you very much. And even putting you on the spot, you've come up with an absolutely excellent summary highlighting those key points. So I really, really appreciate it. So really it leaves me now to thank each of our three speakers, Commissioner Bankole, SRSG Hannah Tese, and Ambassador Jamal, and indeed Solomon and your team in Amani Africa for co-hosting this event with us today. And especially too to thank all of the audience, over 100 participants, for joining the conversation and participating in the Q&A. I think for Ireland, we were particularly proud to lead on the delivery of the UN Security Council Resolution 2594 on peace transitions. And as you've summarised, Solomon, this is a really critical resolution and one that we will be working with and through for many years to come. And I think for Ireland, ensuring strong links between the UN and the AU and between New York and Addis is a priority for our term on the UN Security Council. And we will continue to play our role at both councils, both at the UN Security Council and here in Addis with the AU, in peace transitions, with the aim of enabling sustainable peace for those countries on this wonderful continent of Africa that continue to experience complex crises. So we would hope to be able to convene another one of these important conversations soon, and would really welcome all the participants' engagement in that. And we'll get back to you on that in due course. But in the meantime, best wishes and much gratitude to everyone who's participated today. Thank you very much.